It was a typical morning, but today something felt different. The clouds, thick and dark, seemed to hang lower than usual, almost as if they were trying to weigh down the entire town. The sky had been threatening rain for hours, and as the clock ticked past midday, the first drops fell. Then, without warning, the downpour turned torrential. The streets quickly filled with water, and the familiar hum of the neighborhood went silent. In the middle of this storm, a father sat by the window looking out at the rain. His daughter, still in her pajamas, sat on the couch with her favorite book, the one she'd read 100 times. It had been a long wait, and they were both excited to go to the special event in the city. A day filled with activities, games, and performances. It was a day she'd been looking forward to for weeks. But now the rain was threatening to ruin everything. He knew they couldn't wait much longer. The event was only a few hours away, and they had to leave soon if they wanted to make it. His daughter's excitement was palpable, but there was a growing concern in the back of his mind. The weather had been unpredictable lately, but this was worse than anything he had anticipated. "Dad, is it still happening?" she asked, looking up from her book, a hint of worry in her voice. "What if the rain doesn't stop? Will we have to stay home?" He smiled at her, trying to hide the uncertainty he was feeling. "We'll be fine. The rain won't stop us," he reassured her, though part of him wondered if they would actually make it out. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the sound of raindrops pounding against the windows. His mind raced. The buses would be delayed, and he couldn't risk waiting for a ride. There was no telling when the rain would ease up, and they couldn't afford to lose more time. He had promised her they would make it, and he wasn't about to break that promise. As the rain hammered the roof, he stood up from the couch, pacing the living room. The water was rising in the streets, but there had to be a way. He could see the neighborhood outside, flooded and quiet. It was clear that everyone else was waiting for the storm to pass, but he wasn't about to sit around. He had to make sure his daughter got to the event. "You ready?" he asked her, trying to keep his voice upbeat. She looked at him, her wide eyes showing a mix of confusion and hope. "Ready for what?" she asked. "Let's walk there," he said, surprising himself with the suggestion. But deep down he knew it was the only way. Waiting for a bus was out of the question, and taking a taxi or rideshare in this weather wasn't an option either. They would have to make it there on foot. His daughter hesitated, looking at the storm outside. "But it's really bad out there," she said, her voice small. "We could get wet and cold." "I know, but we can do it," he said, nodding with more confidence than he actually felt. "We won't be out there long. We'll keep moving and we'll get there. It'll be an adventure." She still wasn't convinced, but something in his voice must have reassured her. She nodded slowly, standing up from the couch and pulling her raincoat from the hook by the door. He helped her slip it on, then grabbed his own jacket and umbrella. Together they stepped outside into the storm. The wind hit them immediately, sending cold droplets into their faces. The umbrella barely made a difference against the sheets of rain that fell without mercy. The father shielded his daughter from the worst of it, leading the way as they walked through the flooded streets. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, as most people had stayed inside, waiting for the rain to end. The sound of rushing water filled the air as it flowed down the gutters, and the occasional car splashed by, driving too fast for the conditions. But the father kept his pace steady, focusing on getting them to the event. As they walked, his daughter looked up at him, trying to see through the rain. "Dad," she said softly, "do you think we'll make it in time?" He smiled, though he wasn't sure of the answer himself. "Of course we will," he said. "It's just a little rain. We'll get there, don't worry." They continued walking, their shoes squelching in the wet ground. The father kept looking around, trying to gauge how far they had to go. The storm was worsening, and he could see that the water in the streets was rising. It was becoming harder to walk, but he didn't let it show. He kept moving forward, one step at a time. After what felt like forever, they reached the corner of their street. The father stopped, pausing to catch his breath. His daughter tugged at his sleeve. "Are we almost there?" He looked around, trying to get a sense of where they were. It was hard to tell in the rain, but he thought they were getting close. He smiled down at her, trying to mask his own exhaustion. "Almost there, I promise." As they continued walking, the father's thoughts drifted. Was it worth it? Was it worth walking through this storm just to get to the event? He didn't have the answers, but all he could think about was his daughter. She had looked forward to this day for weeks. How could he disappoint her now? With that thought in mind, he quickened his pace. They had to get there. There was no turning back now. It didn't matter how wet they got or how difficult the journey was. They would make it. But as they rounded the next corner, the father noticed something strange. The neighborhood, usually so quiet, seemed emptier than usual. There were fewer people around, fewer cars on the streets. He had expected to see more people braving the storm, walking to the same event. But there was no one. It made him uneasy. Where had everyone gone? Why weren't people walking around trying to get to the event too? He shook off the feeling, thinking maybe it was just because of the rain. Perhaps the storm had kept everyone else indoors. After all, who else would be crazy enough to walk in this weather? He glanced down at his daughter, who was focused on keeping her footing on the slippery pavement. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, though he could tell the cold was starting to get to her. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, and her lips had begun to tremble. He didn't want to stop, but they couldn't keep going like this for much longer. The storm was relentless. Just then, a car drove by, splashing through a puddle. The father winced, pulling his daughter closer as the water sprayed in all directions. "Let's keep going," he said, trying to push through the discomfort. But something felt off. The street ahead was eerily quiet, and for the first time he began to feel uncertain. What was going on in their neighborhood? Where was everyone? It was almost as if the rain had taken over the world, leaving them stranded in an empty town. But no matter what, they couldn't turn back now. They were so close, and as the storm raged on, the father realized that no matter how bad it got, he wasn't about to let this day slip away from his daughter. He would do whatever it took to make sure she had the chance to experience the event, even if it meant facing the storm head-on. The rain didn't seem to let up, and if anything, it got worse as the father and his daughter made their way down the street. The constant drizzle turned into sheets of water coming down from the sky, pouring like a waterfall. The father held the umbrella tightly, but even it couldn't fully shield them from the storm. The wind was strong and it carried the rain sideways, making it impossible to stay dry. With every step, the father felt the weight of the situation. His daughter's small hand clutched his, but he could feel her growing more and more uncomfortable. Her raincoat, though waterproof, was sticking to her body, and her shoes, which were meant for sunny days, had soaked through. Her enthusiasm from earlier had started to fade, replaced by a quiet frustration. He couldn't blame her. He was feeling it too, but he pushed those thoughts aside. He needed to keep his focus on the goal, getting to the event. They walked past their neighbors' houses, some of them already dark with no sign of life. The windows were shut tight, and there were no sounds of children playing outside, no neighbors chatting in their front yards. The whole neighborhood felt like it had disappeared. It was strange. Normally on a day like today there would be people out and about even in the rain. Maybe others had canceled their plans because of the weather. Maybe he was the only one crazy enough to keep going. "Dad, it's really bad out here," his daughter said softly, looking up at him with her wide eyes. She wasn't asking for him to turn back, but he could tell she was starting to doubt their decision. It was hard to ignore the fact that the rain was making everything harder than it needed to be. "I know, sweetie," he replied, trying to sound reassuring. "But we're not far now. We'll get there, I promise. It's just a little rain." But even as he said those words, he wasn't sure if he believed them. They had been walking for what felt like an eternity, and the storm wasn't showing any signs of slowing down. The streets were slick, the puddles growing deeper with every passing minute. It was hard to keep track of their progress when everything around them looked the same, just a blur of gray sky and wet pavement. The father glanced down at his daughter, who was struggling to keep up. Her small legs weren't built for this kind of journey, and the rain made every step harder. He reached down, gently lifting her up so she could rest against his chest for a moment. She wrapped her arms around him, relieved for the brief break from the rain, but her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She was tired, and she was starting to wonder if this was worth it. "Dad?" she said after a few moments of silence. "Why are we still going? It's so rainy, and no one else is out here." The question hung in the air for a moment, and he didn't know how to answer it. Why were they still walking through the storm? It was more than just the promise he'd made to her. He couldn't explain it, but there was something about that event, about getting there, that felt so important. Maybe it was because he knew how much it meant to her. Maybe it was the idea of showing her that sometimes you have to push through challenges, even when they seem impossible. He gave her a quick smile. "You're right. It's tough out here, but we're so close. Just a little further, okay?" She nodded, though it was clear she wasn't entirely convinced. Still, she didn't argue. She trusted him, and that was enough to keep her going. As they continued walking, the father couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had started creeping in. The neighborhood felt strange, too quiet, almost as if everyone had vanished. Even though it was still early in the afternoon, it felt like the middle of the night. The streetlights flickered and the houses all seemed empty, their curtains drawn tight, their lawns devoid of movement. "Dad, look," his daughter said, tugging at his sleeve. He turned to see what she was pointing at. Across the street there was a row of cars parked along the curb. But the strange thing was that there was no one around. No people in the cars, no one walking or talking. Just the cars, lined up like they were waiting for something. "That's odd," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "What's odd?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. He pointed at the row of cars. "Look, all those cars. Where is everyone?" His daughter squinted through the rain, but the cars seemed out of place. Normally the streets would be full of people trying to get to the same event, trying to beat the rain, but now it seemed like they were the only ones out there. "Maybe they all got there already," she said, her voice hesitant. But he wasn't sure. The cars, parked without anyone in sight, left an unsettling feeling in his gut. Was something happening that he didn't know about? He shook off the thought. It didn't matter. They were almost there, and that's all that mattered. They crossed the street, still making their way forward. The heavy rain seemed to soak through his jacket and clothes now, the cold seeping into his bones. The father tightened his grip on the umbrella, doing his best to shield his daughter. He wanted to protect her from everything. The rain, the cold, the confusion he was starting to feel. As they neared the end of the block, they came across a few more cars, all parked at strange angles, as if they had just stopped without warning. Some had their lights on, others were completely dark. But again, there were no people around. It didn't make any sense. Where had everyone gone? Was there some sort of traffic jam he hadn't heard about? Or had they all gotten to the event already? At that moment, the father felt a pang of worry. What if they had missed it? What if the event had been canceled? He hadn't heard anything about it being called off, but then again, maybe he wasn't paying attention. It had been so chaotic leading up to the day, so filled with little details to sort out. The thought of showing up late, or worse, finding out the event had been called off due to the storm, made his stomach turn. "Dad, are we lost?" his daughter asked, pulling him out of his thoughts. She was still looking around, her eyes wide and unsure. It was clear she was starting to feel the tension, too. "No, we're not lost," he reassured her, his voice steadier than he felt. "We're on the right track. Just a little further now." He had to believe it. He had to believe that they were going to make it, no matter how strange the world around them seemed. They had walked this far, through the storm, through the wet streets and the endless rows of parked cars. There was no turning back now, but still something felt wrong. The silence, the absence of people, it gnawed at him. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was off. But before he could dwell on it any longer, they reached the end of the block, and ahead of them was a large open area. The event should have been right there, but it wasn't. There were no large tents or signs, no crowds of people milling about. Instead, the area was completely empty, with nothing but rainwater puddling in the center. The father stopped in his tracks, his heart sinking in his chest. Where had everyone gone? Had they been wrong about the event? Had it already ended? The storm seemed to grow even fiercer as he stood there, staring at the empty space before them. It was as though the world had disappeared, leaving him standing alone with his daughter in the rain. The father stood frozen, staring at the empty area in front of him. His heart raced, a sense of confusion creeping into his mind. He had been sure they were heading to the event. He had promised his daughter they would make it. But now, the place they had walked so far to reach was completely empty. There were no crowds, no people running around excitedly, no signs or tents set up for the event. It was just an open field with puddles of water collecting in the middle, and the rain coming down harder than ever. "Dad, is this it?" His daughter's voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if she was afraid to ask the question that both of them were thinking. The excitement that had once filled her eyes was now replaced with confusion and disappointment. She was looking up at him, waiting for some kind of explanation, but all he could do was look around, unsure of what had happened. "I don't understand," he muttered, mostly to himself. "I thought this was the place. This is where they said it would be." He glanced around again, hoping for some sign that they were in the right spot, but nothing. The rain pelted his face, the wind howling, and the world around them seemed quieter than it had ever been. It felt like the whole world had suddenly become still. He could feel the weight of the moment sinking in. They had walked so far, braving the storm just to reach this point, only to find nothing. The disappointment was heavy in the air, and his daughter's eyes reflected it perfectly. She was looking up at him, waiting for him to make it right, but he had no answers to give. His stomach twisted in knots. He didn't know what had happened, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like what they had imagined. "I don't get it, Dad," she said quietly, her voice trembling just a little. "Where is everyone? Was it all a lie?" She wasn't mad, not exactly, but there was a sadness in her voice that cut through him. He could see how hard she was trying not to cry, trying not to give up. She wanted him to fix it, and right now he didn't know how. He knelt down to her level, trying to keep his composure. "Hey," he said softly, brushing her wet hair out of her face. "We're not giving up, okay? We're going to figure this out. We didn't walk all this way for nothing." His voice was steady, but inside his mind was racing. He had no idea where everyone had gone. Had they all been there earlier and left? Or was something else going on? His daughter nodded slowly, her eyes filled with doubt, but still trusting him. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that they would still find something fun, something exciting. But the longer they stood there, the more it seemed like that wasn't going to happen. He stood up and looked around again, trying to think. There had to be something he was missing. This couldn't be it. Maybe the event had been moved somewhere else. Maybe they had to go to a different location, maybe. But what? His mind couldn't settle on a single answer. He thought about the cars they had passed earlier, all parked along the streets. None of them had been moving. What if they were all heading to the same place? But where? "Let's walk a little more," he said, trying to sound confident again. "Maybe we missed the entrance or something. Let's see if there's another way in." His daughter didn't argue. She didn't have the energy to. They had already walked so far through the rain, and now it seemed like everything they had worked for was slipping through their fingers. But she followed him, stepping carefully through the puddles, her head hanging low as they made their way to the edge of the field. He wished he could take away her disappointment, but he couldn't. He didn't even know how to fix this. They reached the far end of the empty area, and he stopped, staring into the distance. The streets beyond the field were quiet, eerily still. No movement, no signs of life, just the occasional car speeding by, their tires splashing water as they rushed through the rain. But something didn't feel right. It wasn't just the emptiness of the area, or the fact that the event wasn't where it was supposed to be. It was the whole feeling in the air. Something was off. He turned back to his daughter. "I'm going to check something, okay? Stay here for a minute. I'll be right back." His daughter looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of confusion and concern. "Where are you going?" "Just to check the other side. I'll be quick." "Don't worry," she hesitated, but she nodded. He knew she didn't want to be left alone, but he didn't want her to see the worry on his face. He needed to find out what was going on. He needed to figure out where everyone had gone and why the event wasn't where it was supposed to be. He made his way toward the edge of the field, stepping carefully over the wet grass. He tried to stay calm, but the feeling of unease kept growing. He reached the fence that marked the boundary of the area and looked out into the street. That's when he saw it, the cars. There were so many cars, all parked neatly along the side of the road. They weren't moving. They hadn't been moving the entire time they had been walking. At first, he thought they were just parked cars, people who had arrived early for the event and were now waiting. But as he looked closer, he realized something else. Some of the cars didn't have anyone inside, and those that did, the people were all staring straight ahead, not moving, not getting out. There was something wrong about it all. It was like they were waiting for something. But there was no sign of anything happening. No event, no crowd, no excitement. Just silence. His heart started to beat faster. He turned and ran back to his daughter, his mind racing with all sorts of questions. She was still standing in the same spot, looking down at her feet. When she saw him running toward her, she looked up, her face filled with hope. But the father knew that hope was fleeting. He didn't have any answers. And that broke him. "Dad, what happened?" she asked, her voice trembling now. "Where did everyone go? What are we going to do?" He took a deep breath, his mind trying to process everything. But the truth was, he didn't know. He had no idea what was going on or why everything had fallen apart. All he knew was that they couldn't keep standing in the rain, hoping something would change. He had to do something. He had to make a decision. "We're going to go home, okay?" he said quietly, kneeling down to her level once more. "We've been through a lot today, but we're going to go home and we'll figure it out." "It's okay." His daughter didn't say anything for a moment, but then with a quiet nod she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. She didn't say anything, but her hug said it all. She was scared. She was disappointed, but she trusted him. And in that moment he knew that they had made it through the hardest part. They turned to leave, walking back toward the street. But the silence in the air wasn't over yet. There was something lingering, something that neither of them could quite shake. They didn't know what had happened to the event or where everyone had gone, but they knew one thing. Something was wrong. And they couldn't escape it. The walk back home was quieter than it had been before. The rain didn't seem to be letting up, and with every step the father could feel the weight of disappointment pressing down on him. His daughter walked close beside him, her head tucked into her coat, her face barely visible beneath the hood. He could tell she was trying to stay strong, but he could also sense the confusion and sadness in her. She had been so excited, and now all of that was gone. It broke his heart to see her like this. He glanced at her as they walked, his thoughts racing. What had happened to the event? Why had it turned out like this? The cars, the empty streets, it didn't make any sense. Why were people just sitting in their cars, staring ahead, doing nothing? Why had no one been around when they got there? His mind kept circling back to those questions, but the answers never came. As they reached the edge of the neighborhood, the father slowed down, looking up at the sky. The rain was coming down harder now, and the wind had picked up. It felt like the world was closing in on them, the storm outside matching the storm of confusion in his mind. He could feel his daughter's eyes on him, waiting for him to say something, anything to make sense of all this. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that they'd make it through this. But the truth was he didn't know what was going on. He didn't know how to make sense of what had happened, and that scared him more than anything else. How could he explain something he didn't understand himself? "Dad," his daughter said quietly, her voice breaking through his thoughts. "Where is everyone? Why are they all just sitting in their cars?" The question hung in the air between them, and for a moment the father didn't know how to answer. He looked down at his daughter, seeing the concern on her face. He didn't have any answers to give her, but he had to say something. "I don't know, sweetie," he said softly. "I don't understand it either, but we'll figure it out. We'll get to the bottom of this, okay?" She didn't respond, but he could tell she was trying to hold back the tears. He wished he could take her pain away, make everything right again. But all he could do was keep walking, hoping that somehow, someway, they would find the answers they were looking for. They continued down the street in silence, the only sound being the soft patter of the rain hitting the pavement. The father kept his eyes on the road ahead, his mind still trying to make sense of everything. He wasn't sure how much longer they could keep walking in this storm. His daughter was shivering, her shoulders hunched against the cold, and he knew they had to get home soon. But even as they walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken tension that seemed to follow them every step of the way. As they turned onto their street, the father's thoughts began to race again. What if something had happened to the event? What if it had been canceled because of the rain and they had somehow missed the announcement? He had been so focused on getting them there that he hadn't even thought to check if there were any updates. What if they had just wasted hours walking through the storm for nothing? "Dad, are we going to the park?" his daughter asked, her voice hesitant as if she wasn't sure if it was okay to ask. She was still holding his hand tightly, but now there was a hint of confusion in her voice. "No, sweetie," he said, his voice soft. "We're going home. It's been a long day and I think we need to rest, but we'll figure it out. I promise." His daughter nodded, but there was no excitement in her eyes anymore. She was tired, both physically and emotionally, and the weight of the day was starting to show. The father felt that same weight pressing down on him too. He wished he could fix everything for her, take her back to the moment when they had first set out, when everything felt possible. But now all he could do was walk beside her, trying to stay strong for both of them. When they finally reached their house, the father opened the door and stepped inside, leading his daughter in after him. The warmth of the house felt like a relief after the cold, wet walk home. The rain could still be heard outside, but at least they were safe inside now. The father kicked off his shoes and hung up his jacket before turning to his daughter. "Do you want some hot chocolate?" he asked, his voice gentle. We can sit down, relax, and try to figure out what happened today." She looked up at him, her face still a little sad, but she nodded slowly. "Yeah, that sounds nice." He smiled, trying to make things feel normal again, even though nothing felt normal right now. He walked into the kitchen and started preparing the hot chocolate, trying to focus on the simple task of getting the milk warm and stirring in the cocoa powder. He wanted to take his mind off everything for just a moment, to calm the storm in his own head. But no matter how hard he tried, the questions kept coming back. What had happened to the event? Why had everything turned out so wrong? Once the hot chocolate was ready, he carried 2 mugs into the living room, setting them down on the coffee table. His daughter had already curled up on the couch, her eyes still far away, lost in thought. The father sat down beside her, handing her a mug of hot chocolate. "Here you go," he said, trying to make things feel as normal as possible. "It's not the day we planned, but we're together, and that's what matters." She took the mug in her hands, wrapping her fingers around the warm ceramic. She took a slow sip, then looked up at her dad. "Do you think we'll ever find out what happened?" she asked quietly. The father paused, his heart heavy. He didn't know how to answer her. He wanted to say that everything would make sense soon, that they would figure it out and everything would be okay, but he couldn't promise that. He didn't know what had happened or why it had happened. All he knew was that, for whatever reason, they had been caught in something bigger than they could have imagined. "I don't know, sweetie," he said softly, "but I do know that no matter what, we'll get through it together." She smiled a little, though it was small and unsure. "I hope so, Dad." They sat in silence for a while, both of them lost in their thoughts. The storm outside raged on, but inside, the warmth of the house felt comforting, even if the uncertainty still hung in the air. As the night stretched on, the father couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Something wasn't right, but he didn't know what it was. He had to figure it out for himself, for his daughter. But for now, all he could do was hold her close, keep her safe, and hope that someday the answers would come. The next morning, the sky was clear. The rain had stopped, and the sun peeked through the clouds, casting warm rays over the neighborhood. The father sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window. It was a new day, but the questions from yesterday still hung heavy in his mind. What had happened to the event? Where had everyone gone? And most importantly, why had he not noticed something was wrong sooner? He had spent the night tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling that something bigger had been at play. It didn't make sense that so many people, so many cars were all gathered in the same place, and yet there had been no sign of the event. No one had seemed to be in a hurry to go anywhere. The more he thought about it, the more questions arose, but no answers. His daughter was still asleep, her tired face soft and peaceful, as if the world outside had nothing to do with her. But he knew she was still hurting from the previous day's disappointment. She had tried to be strong, tried to act like she was okay, but he could tell she was still wondering what had gone wrong. He hated that he couldn't give her the answers she needed. But he also knew he couldn't keep this feeling of uncertainty bottled up inside forever. After a few more minutes of staring out the window, the father stood up and made his way to the living room. He needed to do something, anything to clear his mind. As he walked through the house, his eyes fell on the small stack of mail on the counter. Without thinking, he grabbed it and began to sort through it. Bills, flyers, and then something else. A letter, an official-looking envelope. He opened it, his hands trembling just a little. The letter inside was addressed to him, but the name on it wasn't one he recognized. It wasn't from a company or a group or anyone he had ever spoken to. He quickly read the contents of the letter, his heart beginning to race. The letter explained that due to unexpected circumstances, the event had been postponed. The weather, combined with unforeseen logistical problems, had caused delays. But what caught his attention was the last part, the part about the cars, about the crowd. The letter mentioned that people had been misinformed about the location and timing, leading many to gather in the wrong place. It also mentioned that local authorities had been aware of the issue but had not been able to get the word out in time. His stomach sank as he read the words again. Miscommunication. That's what had happened. It wasn't just bad luck or a random mistake. It was a series of things that had gone wrong, all leading to the confusion he had experienced the day before. The cars, the people sitting idly, the absence of the event. It was all because of a mix-up that no one had been prepared for. The father's head spun as he thought about the implications. He felt a strange mix of relief and frustration. At least he had answers now, but they didn't make the situation any easier. His daughter had been disappointed, and he had walked through the storm for nothing. It had been a wasted day, and the guilt of that hung over him. He folded the letter and set it down on the table, taking a deep breath. He needed to tell his daughter. She deserved to know the truth, to understand what had happened. He couldn't keep this from her. As he turned to head upstairs, he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. His daughter was awake. She stood in the doorway, her eyes still tired but curious. "Dad?" she asked softly, her voice uncertain. "Hey, sweetie," he said, trying to smile. "Did you sleep okay?" She nodded, but there was still a look of worry on her face. "Dad, what happened yesterday? Why wasn't anyone there? Where did everyone go?" The father sat down on the couch, patting the seat next to him. "Come here, honey. I need to talk to you about something." She walked over and sat down beside him, looking up at him with wide eyes. He took a deep breath and handed her the letter. "This came this morning," he said gently. "It explains what happened yesterday." She took the letter, her small hands trembling a little as she read through the words. As she finished, she looked up at her dad. "So it wasn't just us? It wasn't our fault?" "No, sweetie," the father said, shaking his head. "It wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. There was a mix-up. People were given the wrong information, and the event wasn't where it was supposed to be. The cars, the people sitting around, everyone was just waiting because they didn't know what had happened either." His daughter's face softened, and for the first time since the previous day, a small smile appeared on her lips. "So it wasn't just a big mistake?" "No, it wasn't just a mistake," the father said. "It was a lot of things going wrong at once. It wasn't anything we could have controlled." She nodded, her shoulders relaxing a little. "I guess that makes sense." The father smiled at her. "I'm sorry I didn't know what was going on sooner. I should have checked, and I shouldn't have made you walk through the storm. I'm really sorry." She looked at him with understanding eyes. "It's okay, Dad, I'm not mad. I was just confused. I thought we did something wrong." "We didn't," the father said firmly. "This wasn't our fault. And I'm proud of how strong you were yesterday. You kept going even when it got tough. That's something to be proud of." Her eyes brightened a little at his words, and she hugged him tightly. "Thanks, Dad." They sat there for a moment, just holding each other. The father felt a weight lift off his shoulders as his daughter's arms wrapped around him. It wasn't the perfect ending, but it was better than he had expected. They weren't going to let the confusion of yesterday define their day. They had each other, and that was what mattered. After a few moments, his daughter pulled away and looked up at him with a mischievous grin. "So, what now? Are we going to try the event again when it happens?" The father chuckled, feeling a sense of warmth spread through him. "Absolutely. We'll be ready next time, and this time we'll double-check everything so we don't get caught in the rain again." She laughed, the sound filling the room with lightness. "Deal, but next time let's just take a cab." He grinned. "Next time, I promise." As the day went on, the father and daughter talked about their plans for the future, making new memories to look forward to. The mix-up from the day before slowly faded into the background, replaced with hope and a renewed sense of togetherness. And as the father looked out the window at the clear skies, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. They had been through a tough day, but they had made it through together, and sometimes that was all that mattered.